All right, the first math question. What is 10% of 47D? Well, let's find out. 110, 1/10 is actually equal to 10%. And then, so we can multiply that by 470 over 1. And we can quickly cross out the zeros and we get 47 over 1. And that means the answer is going to be B. If you want to do it another way, you could just do 10%, which would be zero point 0.1 times 470. Move the decimal, we would once again get 47. But if I were taking this live on a test, I would just know that 10% times 470, cut a zero by moving that one decimal, you know it's 47 without having to do any calculations, and that's kind of the fastest way you can do it. All right, question 2. Which equation has the same solution as the given equation? So we know that the equation is 4x plus 6 equals 18. And from the looks of it, it just wants us to isolate 4x. So let's get rid of this 6 by subtracting it from both sides. We would end up with 4x equals 18. Just kidding. We would get 4x equals 12, which is going to be C. All right. Okay. So after reading this, we know the total cost of rent or is there's going to be a $25 service fee, and that looks to be a one-time fee. This is going to cost you $10 per hour, and it's going to be T is the amount of hours. And they want to spend at most 75 bucks. Cool. So knowing that, looking at the answer choices, they're going to want me to put that into an equation. So quickly, I would just do 10 times T because it's 10 per hour. T is the amount of hours, so it's the dependent variable dependent on the amount of hours. And then you're going to add it to that $25 service fee because that is a one-time payment. And you want to spend at most 75. So you're going to want to spend the less than or equal to 75 bucks. Sweet, you got your equation right there. So let's look at the choices. We know this is wrong. It's not going to include the 25. And we know this is wrong because it's not including 10. So we're left with these two. This one, I can see how it tricks you, but they put the variable on 25 and it's supposed to be on 10. So we know B is wrong. 25, yep, 25 plus 10t less than or equal to 75 is the correct answer. So it is D. So function g is defined by g of x equals x squared plus 9. What is the value if gx equals 25? So really what it's asking for us is to see what x is when g of x equals 25. So this would be the equation you come up with and solve for x. So we would naturally subtract 9 from both sides. 25 minus 9 would be 16 equals x squared. If you have a squared number or variable, you would square root it, get rid of that. And we would have 4 equals x. And yep, here we go. All right, number 5. Okay, so we have for word problems, write out the information as you read it, so you don't have to go back and reread the problem. So we know we have a 14-sided die, and we're going to have numbers 1 through 14 with a different number appearing on each face, meaning no numbers are repeating. The die is rolled one time. What is the probability of rolling a 2? So it's rolled once, and we're going for a 2. So if 2 is just one number out of 14, then the odds of you hitting it is one number out of 14. So very quickly, you should find that it's A. Looking at these choices, maybe you put 2 in there thinking it's the value rather than just the amount on the die. So that's wrong. Maybe 14 minus 2, thinking the same thing as B, but just going in an opposite direction. That's wrong. And then 13 over 14 would be if they asked, you know, what are the odds of it not landing on a 2? Then you would put that because there are 13 other numbers than 2, but that's not what it's asking. It's asking what are the odds that you roll on a 2, so that's wrong as well. All right, number 6. So a printer produces posters at a constant rate of 42 posters per minute. And she wants to find out how much it can do in an hour. So we know there's 42 in a minute, and we know there are 60 minutes in an hour. So let's set up an equation. What I would do is go 42 posters over 1 minute, and we're trying to convert this into hours. So we want to put minutes on top and hours on the bottom so the minutes can cancel each other out. And we know there's 60 minutes in an hour, and there's 1 hour. And that equals how many? So 42 times 60 would be 2,520 posters. Remember, these minutes would cancel out in 1 hour, and that's how you would find the answer. But if I were taking this on a real SAT, I'd try to go a little faster than having to draw an equation. I know if he's making 42 posters per minute, I know it would have to increase because there's 60 minutes in an hour. And just immediately, without drawing anything out, just do 42 times 60 and get the answer. So we know fx equals 7x plus 2, and they're just trying to find what it equals when x equals 4. So be 7x plus 2 equals what? Well, we know it would be 7 times 4 plus 2 equals what? It would be 28 plus 2 equals what? We know it would be 30. And that is the answer. Okay. So teacher creating an assignment worth 70 points. 70 points total. And it's going to consist of 1 point and 3 point questions. So 1 point and 3 point questions. Which equation represents a situation where x is the number of 1 point questions and y represents the number of 3 point questions? Okay, so the number of these questions, number of 1 point questions is x, and then number of 3 point questions is y. But we're solving for the amount of points, so we need to keep that in the equation. So we know the number of them is x, and they're going to be worth 1. And we know there's going to be y amount of 3 point questions. We know they're going to add up to be 70 points, and so that's why I would write the equation this way. And so looking at the answers, that immediately is D. And these other ones are meant to trick you as if you added them together, which is not true because they're worth different amounts. So that's why you have to keep it this way. Since they're different variables as well, you can't add them together because that's how they're getting that 4, is if they're doing that. But you cannot do that at any point in time unless x and y are the same value, which they are not. So that is why D is the correct answer. All right. So right triangles LMN and PQR are similar, and we're trying to find the measure of angle Q. So what do we know? LMN, PQR are similar triangles. All right, so what does that mean? What does it mean that they're similar triangles? Well, since we both know that both are right triangles, whoa. And so what similar triangles mean, it means that their sides or their lengths, hypotenuse, etc. are proportional. So for this, if they were proportional, it does not mean they have to be the same size, but it does mean that it has to look something like this, proportional. But what it also implies is their angles are the same. So we already know they're 90-degree angles, and so let's put this as L, M, N, and this would be P, Q, R. All right. And so we know angle M has a measure of 53 degrees. And so actually quickly you can find out that M and Q proportional with each other. So they should have the same amount of degrees. So very quickly you can choose B because L because M and Q are the same because they correspond with each other. But if you want to do it the long way, it's 90, 53. There's 180 degrees in a triangle, meaning that this is 37 degrees left over. And then that means this would be 37 degrees as well as this still being 53 degrees. All right, question 10. The solution to the given system of equations is x, y. What is the value of x? So we're trying to find x, and when you see how the SAT makers set this up, it's usually a hint. They want you to find x, so that means you have to get rid of y, and they conveniently set it up so y equals negative 3x. So very likely, just by looking at this, I would know we would have to replace y with this equation. And this drawn out would be 4x minus 3x, because this is where the y would have gone, but y equals negative 3x equals 15. And 4x minus 3x, you're left with 1x equals 15. So x equals 15. So yeah, I mean, for reference, that when you see this, the way it's set up is usually a hint. And so that would be the quickest way to find that this is C, 15. All right, so for number 11, which of the following equations is most appropriate linear model for the data shown in the scatter plot? I'll quickly glance at the answers. They want me to write it as a y equals mx plus b. But if you want to quickly do it, you know that the y-intercept is going to be a positive 10-ish. We know the slope is going to be negative. So just looking at that in general, we know we can cross out C, D, and we know that A is wrong because this is a negative and this is a positive. So you're left with B. That would be the quick way to do it. I mean, if you really wanted to double check your work, you could do rise over run. So you know it's going to be 10. It's going to go down 10 over 5. So you know the slope's going to be somewhere around negative 2, which is kind of what they all say. So they're really looking, for, at least in this question, for you to know that this is a positive value and that the slope is negative. And using those little shortcuts is how you would quickly find B. And yep. All right, so for number 12. Graph y equals fx is shown, where that's the function. Fx equals ax cubed, yada yada. A, b, c, d are constants for how many values of x does fx equal 0? So what it's asking for us is how many times does x equal 0? Well, you know, looking at the graph, that this is the x-axis, and it hits 0 at 1, 2, 3 times. And so very quickly, we know it would be C, but another way to find this would be to, in fact, whatever the first exponent of this equation is the number of times it hits 0. So, you know, a lot of them we see are like this, just as an example, and they're kind of looking like that because oftentimes it hits it twice, hence the 2. Or you could plug it into the graphing calculator that you're allowed to use on the test, but you would have to fudge these numbers. That actually sounds super difficult. Would not recommend that. Totally use the graph, just look at it, and if you want to double check, make sure you look at that exponent. So number 13. Vivi and Bob party hats and cupcakes for $71. So for all math word problems, write out the information as you read it so you don't have to go back. Each package of party hats costs $3, so I'll just draw that as 3H for hat. Each cupcake costs $1, so 1 for a cupcake. Then she bought 10 packages of party hats. She bought 10 of those. How many cupcakes did she buy? So basically, the equation would be 3H plus C equals the $71 that she spent total. And we know that she bought 10 packages of hats, so 10 equals H. So let's plug that in. So we know that it's 3 times 10 plus C equals 71. 30 plus C equals 71. Take away the 30 from each side, and C equals 41, and that's how you solve for the amount of cupcakes. Number 14. What is one of the solutions to the given equation? So the equation is z squared plus 10z minus 24 equals 0. All right. So what's one of the solutions? So they want us to simplify this equation. And how we do that is, let's write it out. So it's going to be z squared plus 10z minus 24 equals 0. So we need to find what multiples of 24 added together, or negative 24 added together equal 10z. And so first thing that comes to mind is 12 and 2. So that would have to be a positive 12 and a negative 2 because 10 or 12 plus negative 2 would equal positive 10, but multiplied together would be a negative 24. So that would be z plus 12 times z minus 2 equals 0. And to find one of the solutions, you set these equal to 0. So z plus 12 equals 0. You get z equals negative 12. And then you would have z minus 2 equals 0. And you would have z equals 2, positive 2. And so both of these would be a correct answer for 14. All right, number 15 is another word math problem. And so write the information as you read it so you don't have to go back and reread it because that takes more time. Bacteria are growing in a liquid growth medium. And there were 300,000 cells per milliliter, so we know it's 300,000 per milliliter during the initial observation, so in the beginning. The number of cells per milliliter doubles every 3 hours. So every 3 hours, it doubles. How many cells per milliliter will there be after 15 hours in the initial observation? So 15 hours, how many times, how many will be left? All right, sweet. So we know there's going to be 15 hours, and every 3 hours it doubles. So that means it's going to double 15 over 3. It's going to double 5 times. So if we write this out, we start with that initial 300,000. And it's going to double once, double, or if you let it count it in hours. First one's going to be 600,000. Then it's going to do it again to 1.2 million. It's going to do it again for 2.4 million. And it's going to do it again for that 4.8 million. And so that's 1, 2, 3, 4 doubles, or 3, 6, 9, 12 hours. So for the last one, that's gonna be our 5th double or our 15th hour. So it's 10.6 thousand. All right, so it's gonna be answer choice D. You can tell because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doubles, or 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 hours. All right, number 16. Which expression is equivalent to 6x to the 8th y to the second plus 12x to the second y to the second? And so this looks like a problem they're going to want us to simplify. Looking at the answer choices, I'm going to look and see what they have in common. So 6x squared y second, and then 12x squared y. So I know that immediately with the 6 and the 12, I can take out that first 6. I know there is going to be, with the exponents, I can take out x2, and now I can take out y squared. And what's left will be x to the 6th plus 2, and that is answer C. And I'll say just be careful, because I see how this D looks like a plausible answer, because when you're doing when you're doing x to the 8th, and you're dividing it by x to the second, instead of, you don't actually divide the exponents, you subtract them. So that's why it's x is to the sixth, because it's 8 minus 2, not x over 2, or 8 over 2. All right, number 17. What they're asking us in this is basically what x equals. And so it talks about the 2 hectare park and the 35 hectare residential area. And then we have the total number is 3,934. All right, so obviously this x has to relate to the park because it's a 2 hectare park. It's 2x and this is 35y. So 35 hectare residential area. So what does x represent? Well, if we're going to take 2x, if we're going to take a 2 hectare park and divide it by 2, which is clearly the multiplier here, we would just have 1 hectare. So it would be 1 hectare. I'm going to abbreviate that for the park. And we can do it with the other one. So that 35 hectare would be 1 hectare for a residential area. And then those added together would be the total number. So let's look at the answer choices. The average number of trees per hectare. Well, that relates to the 1 hectare park, so we're going to say yeah to that one. The average number of trees per hectare in the residential area? Well, no, because we're talking about the park, not the residential area. Residential area is Y. So I'm going to say no. Total number of trees in the park? No, we're actually given that number, so that's out. And the total number of trees in the residential area, once again, we're talking about the park, not the residential area. So the answer choice has to be A. All right, for number 18, what they're asking us is to write an equation that represents this graph. So based off of looking at it, I immediately know that the y-intercept is 40, so y equals 40. I know that it's going to have a negative slope, and based off that alone, I would write it like y equals negative mx plus 40. And based off that equation alone, I can say that a is out, c is out, because those are both wrong. It's not the y-intercept, and that's positive, so that's wrong too. And that leaves us with b and d. That stinks because they're not putting it in the simple y equals mx plus 40 form. They're doing something a little different. And so the best way to go about this is to just solve for the slope and get this equation normally. And so the way we solve for the slope is rise over run. And so we know it goes down negative 40, so down 40 over 60. That means we know the slope is, simplifying this, divide that by 2, you're going to get 2 over 3, negative 2/3. So y equals negative 2/3 x plus 40. Sweet, now we have our equation. But we're going to try to transfer it into these. And our big clue here is what we're multiplying by is how do we get 40 into 480? Because that seems to be the consistent variable in both these equations. And we know it's the y-intercept because it's not connected to a variable. It's the only one that's not. So what is 480 divided by 40? Well, we know that's 12. We can plug that into the calculator, or you can do 4 times 12 equals 48 and add that 0. So we're going to multiply this entire equation by 12. We're going to get 12y equals, and if you do negative 2/3 times 12, you can get that divided by 3 and get negative 8. So we know that's negative 8x plus 480. And based off this information alone, just looking at the 12y, 8x, we know that it's not this one because it's 12x, 8y, which is not what we got. So we know it's B, but if you really want to check, move that over, get 8x plus 12y equals 480. All right, number 19. So they're asking us the area of B, how much greater is it than the area of A? And so we know A has a radius of 3n, and B has a radius of 129n. But they're not asking us how much bigger the radius is, they're asking us how much bigger the area is. So what's the equation for the area of a circle? Well, it's going to be pi r squared is the area of a circle. So we're going to plug both these radiuses into that equation. So A will equal pi r, and r will be 3n squared, and that will equal pi 9n squared. And then B will equal pi, and its r is 129n squared. And that equals 129 times 129 is 16,000, is pi times 16,641 n squared. And so how do we find the difference between these two? Well, you would divide. So we have 16,641 pi n squared all over 9 pi n squared. These would all cancel out. And what we're left with is 16,641 over 9. And that would equal 18 or be careful because they were asking us the area. If you just solved for how much bigger 129 is, then 3, you're solving for how much larger its radius is, which would be 43, which is wrong. And then this one would be if you solve for how much bigger the diameter is, and that's wrong as well. So make sure you're reading carefully. Okay. What it's asking us to do is find the maximum data value in the set. And what that means is they're asking us to find the highest number within the set. So it's usually the largest value in the data set. And that, if you know what that means off the top of your head, you immediately know that's 14, and you would move on. But, there's a few others, so it's asking you, what has the highest frequency. That would be 11 because it shows up the most times, or the mean, median, and mode. You can calculate those, but it is asking you the maximum data value, so that is just the highest number within the set. All right, so for number 21, they're asking us what is r. So we got to solve for r. Sweet. So luckily enough, they gave us the equation of a circle here. So we know it has endpoints. The diameter of that circle has endpoints 2, 4, and 214. And to draw it out, it would look like this. And so it's should be a change in y. So we know that's 2, 4. It's be 2, 14. And they give us the equation of a circle, where r is what its value r. So an easy way to do that would just be plug in the x, plug in the y. You could use either of them, and I think you would get the same answer because it's squared, so no negatives would matter. So we could do 2 minus 2 squared plus y. Y would be 4 minus 9 squared equals r squared. That would be 0 plus, and this would be negative 5 to the square root would be 25 equals r squared. Square root, root of 5 equals r. But if you're a brainiac and you saw this, this is a much quicker way to do it, would be to draw it out and realize that these two numbers are the difference between the diameter. So you're looking for the radius. Well, that would be half the distance between these 2 points. And you would show through the y's. So if it's 2, 4 and 2, 14, well, we know the difference between the y's would be 14 minus 4, and that would equal 10, and that would be the diameter. Then half that over 2, so 5 would be the radius, because the radius is half the diameter. And so that would be a quick way to find it. Or you can just do the plug and chug method of just putting 2 and 4 or 2 and 14 in this equation. Either way, you would still find r. All right, number 22. It's asking us what is the measure of angle t in degrees. So, the measure of angle r is 2.3 radians, or 2.2 pi over 3 radians. Okay. And t is actually r plus 5 pi because it's that much bigger than r over 12. So to find t, we would just do 2 pi over 3 plus 5 pi over 12. And to get these to be common denominators, we would multiply this by 4. And so you would have, let's drag it up here, 8 pi 12 plus 5 pi over 12. You would end up with 13 pi over 12. Hold it back down here. So we now know that t equals 13 pi over 12. But how do we get this into degrees? Degrees. So the equation is actually given to us earlier at the beginning of the test. It tells us in the bottom fine print that actually 2 pi equals 360 degrees. And what it's referring to is 2 pi is radians. And so if we need to know what a radian is, so imagine a circle and you have the radius. And the radius is this distance. Imagine if we took the distance, that radius, and slapped it on the circumference or the edge of the circle while pulling it back, making an equilateral triangle. This degree right here is what the radian is. And as you can imagine, as circles get bigger, so does the radius. So every circle actually has the same amount of radians. So therefore, we can calculate it because if you add all the radians together in a circle for 360 degrees, it equals 2 pi. So using that information, we can actually take 13 pi over 12 radians and multiply it by that 2 pi 360 model. But what we want to do is get it into degrees, so we need to make pi the denominator. So immediately we can cancel out the pi's. So really it's 3 over 13 over 12 times 360 over 2, so 13 over 12 times 180 degrees, and that would actually equal 195 degrees, and so that's how we get answer choice C. And if you're just guessing in general, like if you made it all the way to 13 pi over 12, I would just go ahead and suggest that you can easily cancel out A and B because that is actually 1/112th, meaning a good guess would have been 390 because, the whole circle would have been 1 and then maybe a little bit over. Or if you're thinking if it was 180, then you could say 180 plus a bit, you would find 195, and that would give you a 50% chance of likelihood of just getting it right because you've been between C and D. So just food for thought. If you made it about halfway and needed to guess, that's kind of a good, train of thought to follow. All right, number 23. What is it asking us? It is asking us what is the area in square yards of this town? And what do we know already? We know that the area is 4.36 square miles. And a way to write square miles, and this will help later, is miles squared, because that's basically what it is. Square miles is miles squared. But what do we know? We also know that 1 mile equals 1,760 yards. But they're asking, what is it in square yards? So what do we need to do? We need to get this m to match that m to find the amount of square yards that go into a square mile. And so what do we need to do? We need to square both sides. Get those into yard squared and mile squared because you need them in the same unit to properly measure them. So we know that m squared is pretty easy. Squaring 1 is 1. But 1,760 squared is equal to 3,097,600 yards squared. And so for every square mile, there's 3,097,600 squared yards. And sweet. So now how much is it in 4.36 miles squared equals how many square yards? So we need to multiply this by 4.36. And we find out that that is actually 13,505,536. And that is how you find D as the right answer. So just be careful. Make sure you pay attention to mile is not the same as square miles. The difference is that this is miles squared. And then the same thing with yards and square yards. Square yards equal yards squared. And that's how they have all these answers to bait you. And oftentimes they might actually put the right answer and make it the largest answer because that's a test taking strategy is you don't go for the lowest answer, you don't go for the highest answer because if you're guessing you tend to go for the middle, but the SAT knows this, so they actually made D a much larger answer than everything else. So don't use that as a cause to not choose the biggest answer because the SAT knows this and might actually make the biggest answer more likely. But that's how you do this problem. And all you have to do is make sure to know that yards and square yards are two different units of measurement, and you have to get them all into the same unit of measurement in order to really find out how large it is. All right, number 24. So after reading the question, we know that this is the table for line H, and we know that line K is just 5 further down than line H, and what it's asking us for is what is the x-intercept of line K, and what we know is when the x-intercept, so when the value hits 0 on the x-axis, we know y equals 0 and x equals what? And that's what it's asking us for line K. So we know H, this is the data table for H, but we know that K is only H moved down 5. And what that means is we're not affecting the X, so the X part of this equation, because we're not moving horizontally at all. It's only moving vertically. So we're changing all Y values down 5. So we could actually write it as in K is X and then Y minus 5. And so if we went ahead and put that into a table, we would have K here, we would have X, Y, and a table. So we'd have 18, and then 130 minus 5 would be 125. We would have 23, and then we move that down 5 to 155, then 26 to 173. Sweet. And so what do we need to do in order to find this equation? Well, we need to find the equation for the line K. And so how we would do that? We would need to find the slope. So using these variables, we can actually find rise over run, or the slope. And that's the equation y squared minus y1 over x squared minus x1. And this would just basically be the change in the rise over the run would be the slope. So we could do 155 minus 125 would be 23 minus 18. And that would eventually be 30 over 15, or 30 over 5, which would equal 6, and that is the slope. So now we have y equals 6x plus b. So we need to find b. And the way we can do that is just plugging in some of these numbers into that equation to find b. So we would know that 155 equals 6 times 23 plus b. We know that 155 would equal 138 plus b, and subtract 138 on both sides. We would find that 17 equals b. Sweet, so now we have our entire equation. We have y equals 6x plus 17. And so, what are we solving for? We're solving for the x-intercept, so y has to equal 0. So let's just throw in 0 for y, and that would be 6x plus 17. Move the 17 over. We'd have negative 17 equals 6x. Divide that by 6. We would have negative 17 over 6 equals x. And so putting that in this, we would put 17 over 6, comma, 0. And luckily enough, that is answer D. All right, for number 25. So we found that they're asking us for the value of c, and I can tell that this is the equation, y equals c at exactly 1 point. Okay, well, if they give you a full equation, what I would highly recommend is you plugging that into the Desmos graphing calculator that you will be allowed to use on your test. And if you go ahead and do that, it'll show you a graph that looks something like this, where this is negative 100. And if you draw it, it should look a bit like that. Hopefully a little straighter. And yeah, you should have a vertex around here. And so a big hint is also one y equals c. What is the value of c? So you're looking for the y in this equation. So the x, y, you're looking for the y. And when it says a parabola and it hits them at 1 point, well, there's no really any other place where you can hit a parabola exactly at 1 point. It'd have to be like this, where it's straight across or straight up and down at the vertex, because otherwise you would pass right through it and you would hit it at 2 points at any other angle. You would have to hit it at 2 points. So by it saying it hits it at 1 point, you know it's going at the vertex. And so when you plug it into your graphing calculator, you're looking for the y value of your vertex, and it should give it to you. It is 79.75 negative 79.75. And so, knowing that, you would go and look at your answer choices. So, immediately you know that's not true, and that's not true. That's too small, and that is your y-intercept. So, you know that's not it, because that would be when x equals 0, and that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for when y equals c. And so plugging this in, you would just calculate that, and that is equal to negative 120 something. But we know that's not wrong. We know that's wrong because we're looking for negative 79.75. So you're left with C. And that is negative 79.75. But if somehow you don't want to use your graphing calculator, which I highly recommend you you figure out how to use your graphing calculator, because that makes this equation so much less daunting, that there actually is an equation you can do if you need to find the answer to this question without the calculator, and you would use it through this equation where x equals negative b over 2a, and you would find negative b over here, and then you would find a here, or sorry, that's b, that's a, and so you could plug that in where b equals 9, a equals negative 1. You'd plug that in, find x, and then plug x into that equation and come back with negative 79. But I would recommend just plugging it into your calculator and finding that vertex, and it would save you a lot of time on the test. But yeah, that's how you figure out 25. All right, number 26. So for each real number r, which of the following points lie on the graph of each equation in the xy plane for the given system? Sweet. So looking at this, it's a little confusing. So what is r for each real number? So looking at these, I'm just scrolling. I see R here, R here. Because when I don't usually know what to do based off of the question, I just go to the answer choices and then I'll see if they give me a hint. So this one's a little confusing because it has R in both the X and the Y, but this one's not. This one gives me Y equals R, X equals what? Because R is in the Y place. And these two give me when X equals R, y equals what? Because that's what you would solve for to see the difference between these two. And I guess just starting top to bottom, I would try this one. And where am I going to plug y equals r? Looking at this, you can see the 7, the 3, the 2. So odds are I'm going to use this first equation because that has all those numbers in it. So I'm taking 2x plus 3y equals 7. I'm going to plug in r for y. So that's now going to be 2x plus 3r equals 7. And so I'm trying to find what x equals. So I'm going to try to isolate this. So now I have 2x equals 7 minus 3r. And I'm going to do x equals, because I'm going to divide it all by 2, 7, 2. minus 3 over 2r. Or I guess rewritten, that would equal negative 3, 2 plus 7, 2r equals x. And that's actually correct. Yeah, so that's the answer. B, just based off that logic. But if you want to go ahead and obviously double check your work, I'm not going to frown upon that because if you have the time to double check your work, it's always a good idea. So if we were going to do it this way, where we're going to plug in, if x equals r, then what is y? So if we take the same equation, 2x plus 3y equals 7, but instead of y equals r, we're doing x equals r, we do 2r equal or plus 3y equals 7. We'd get 3y equals negative 2r plus 7, and then y equals negative 2 over 3r plus 7 over 3. And looking at the answer choices, this has all the right numbers, except that's not a negative, so C is wrong. And this one has an inverse, so that's wrong. And since B is right, A is still wrong, I would go with B. All right, question 27. So the perimeter of an equilateral triangle is 624 centimeters. So when they talk about shapes or it's a word problem regarding shapes, it really helps just to draw them. So what I'm going to do is draw the equilateral triangle. And what it means is equilateral meaning all sides are the same. And then we know that 3 of the same sides add up to 624 centimeters. And so let's label this as like x, x, x. We know the height of this triangle is k to the root of 3. So we know that's k to the root of 3. And k is a constant. And we're trying to find the value of k. All right, cool. So immediately looking at this, I can tell we've created a right triangle because you just draw a straight line against a perpendicular line. It's going to make 90 degrees, or 180 split over 2, 90 degrees. And looking at this, we can find that, if all the sides are the same and they add up to 624, wouldn't it make sense to say 3x equals 624? 624 centimeters, and 3x's and 1x plus 1x plus 1x would be 3x. Put that over 3, we would actually find that x equals 208. So now knowing these x's mean 208, what I see is a hint that we should go ahead and use one of these right triangles. And the reason I'm saying that is because right triangle is the only triangle we can make a ton of assumptions about because they're all the same. So let's go ahead and draw it. And seeing that this is the height, we've actually split this side into 2. So if I were to take this triangle and move it over here, we would find it as a right triangle, where this side it would be k to the root of 3. This would actually be 208. This side would be 208. And this side would be 208 over 2 because it's been split in half. So this would be 104. So now looking at this, we can say that we have all the lengths of this triangle. But why I said this was also a hint is because look at this root of 3. If you go back to where they listed all the equations, they actually show you an image of a right triangle that looks like this. Where if this is x, and root 3, this would be x, and this would be 2x of a right triangle. And so using these dimensions, look at this, it matches all of that, where k, 104 times 2 would be this. So actually we know that k, according to this, would equal 104. K would equal 104. But watch out. So if they randomly give you a k square root of 3, that's a hint. They didn't choose square root of 3 for no reason. And so you could go back and look at the equations if you're ever lost, and you could see that this would have something in common with that. And if you draw it out, you might see that it splits it in half, creating multiple right triangles. But that's kind of the theory that you need to use in order to find that k equals 104.